Towards the end of World War II and the Holocaust, in 1944 and 1945, Soviet, British, and American soldiers liberated Europe, freeing what remained of European Jewry from forced labor camps, concentration camps, and extermination camps. Jews, and particularly Jewish children and adolescents, were also liberated from their places of hiding and from monasteries. On Victory Day, Europe joyously celebrated its freedom, but for many Jews, liberation came too late. Aside from the immediate joy of being freed, this day marked the beginning of their coming to terms with the scale of destruction and disaster. The life they had known before the war was no longer. Liberation Day was the beginning of an almost superhuman effort to gather the fragments of life and begin anew. Many of the liberated Jews succumbed quickly after liberation. The long years of suffering had left their mark, and thousands died from weakness, hunger, diseases, and overeating in the immediate aftermath of liberation. According to estimates, some 20,000 former Jewish prisoners died in Germany during the first weeks after liberation. The physical condition of those who survived was exceedingly poor, with most suffering from malnutrition and serious disease as a result of their living conditions during the Holocaust. The loneliness survivors faced upon liberation was at times too much to bear. During the difficult war years, the struggle to survive had left little room for thoughts about the fates of their families, loved ones, and former lives. Now that they had been liberated, the survivors were forced to face up to their losses. Their parents, partners, children, homes, cities, their entire worlds and identities were gone. This recognition resulted in feelings of ruin and despair, and at times, even a sense of guilt for having survived while their families had been murdered. Many survivors were left entirely alone, without any family or friends. Some were the last remnants of their communities, without a soul in the world who had known them from their previous lives. As soon as the eastern areas had been liberated by the Red Army in the summer of 1944, Jews began to wander from place to place, searching for their family members, property, and communities. Their return home was protracted and complicated. At the end of the war, Europe was plunged into chaos. Basic means of transportation were lacking, and the transportation that was to be found was irregular. Travelers often fell victim to violence along the way. When survivors arrived at their destinations, there was usually no one waiting for them. In rare cases, they would meet other family members wandering among the ruins. Many survivors discovered that their families had been murdered and that strangers were living in their homes. In addition, some of the survivors encountered anti-Semitic violence, particularly in Eastern Europe. In pogroms that took place in Polish towns and cities, 350 Jews were murdered by the end of 1945. The best known was the Kielce pogrom, in which 42 Jews were murdered. In Western Europe as well, the Jewish survivors faced many difficulties from their neighbors and from the bureaucratic organizations tasked with caring for them. Anti-Semitic incidents and the generally hostile environment led many Jews to organize a spontaneous exodus from Eastern Europe, heading for Germany, Austria, and Italy. This flight was organized by survivors, mainly former partisans and soldiers, in an attempt to reach the coasts of the Mediterranean, and from there, the land of Israel. From their testimony, we can learn that, alongside feelings of despair and emptiness, survivors were also filled with a strong urge to live and a burning desire to return to normality and resume their lives, even if that meant finding a new meaning for their lives. Many of the Jews had nowhere to go and nowhere to return to, and so they remained in the former concentration camps. According to the Allies' definition, they became displaced persons. The survivors, who only a few weeks before had been prisoners in these camps, now found themselves living in them as free people.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brooke Braverman, and I am a second-year student at Brock University studying in the Concurrent Education program with a major in history. During the Holocaust, my great-grandmother hid with a non-Jewish farmer, and my great-grandfather fought in the Russian army, where he lost his first family, 2 boys, and his wife during the war. After the war, they were sent to a DP camp in Austria, where both my great-grandparents met and married. My grandfather and his twin brother were born at the camp and eventually moved to Canada on a boat when they were 3. As the Holocaust Education Chair on the Chabad at Brock Student Board, I'm honored to welcome you today as we mark 80 years since the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp was liberated on January 27, 1945. I would also like to thank the Brock Coalition Against Anti-Semitism, the BCAA, for your partnership and support in the planning of this event. We also appreciate the support of everyone who is here, and I would like to acknowledge some of the event sponsors. From the Jewish community of Niagara, Congregation B'nai Israel, Jewish in Niagara Collective, Chabad Niagara, and Margaret's Legacy. We have here Jamie Bear from Stand With Us Canada, who brought us a suitcase of artifacts for us to bear witness to today. Thank you for your support and your resources for today's events. I also want to acknowledge our local dignitaries and elected officials. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate your support. During the Holocaust, 6 million innocent Jews were killed based on claims that they were not pure enough for a prosperous Germany, such that they should be gassed and murdered in concentration camps as a result. More than 1 million people were sent to gas chambers to their agonizing deaths. In 2005, the United Nations General Assembly designated January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, as International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a time to remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution. As we are witnessing an alarming rise of anti-Semitism around the globe, it is more important than ever to recognize the critical lessons of Holocaust history as we commemorate the victims and honor the stories. On this day, we remember Holocaust victims by reading their names, by lighting candles, and by learning about the Holocaust. All of us can mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day by sharing the truth of the Holocaust and by confronting anti-Semitism and hate in our daily lives. As Jewish people, we have a saying, L'Dor V'Dor, from generation to generation. Today, you will see how Holocaust survivors and Holocaust memories were passed down from generation to generation. In our livable exhibit, Holocaust Descendants, Jewish students and faculty have honored their families by sharing their stories. Passing on memories and stories is one of the most fundamental ways of instilling never again for future generations.
Hi, my name is Jack Filer. I'm a Jewish student at Broad, and I'm in my 5th year of junior education. I'm also a member of the Chabad at Brock Board, and just about a month ago, during Dr. Take's lecture group, all of the on the project on campus. Visit several places that concept, vibrant, some of which are we also visited the at the end of the day, approximately 300 people have been murdered. The rest have been murdered, mostly in the where the Jewish men, women, and children of Ternau were murdered and buried massively. It was awfully terrifying how well preserved such a prevalent site was. The historical significance of prevalence location was reaffirmed Hitler's agenda with the when I had seen with my own eyes, I'm seeing several cars pass by, bus full of university students waiting to enter such a dark place that's only accessible from a small, thick traffic roads. While visiting Auschwitz was also deeply disturbing to went to several different and was so difficult. Behind them seemed the pods of the van and the bags, and all the belongings that people have brought after being misled that they will have to put into the sand. Then being told that they will have to bring their belongings, and they will leave them there as soon as they get off the train, well, separate from their families, some never to be seen again. In the gas chambers, the silence really filled the room with laughter. I saw the ovens next to the door used for pre-made fun. The reason I chose to make this video when I was younger, a girl had my small son when I was a kid. They did not have a lot of courage, all of jewelry, but they were next according to the details that my mother kept. His father, my great-grandfather, had his business taken away, lots of their property taken away, and they were stripped of the rights practices that became non-Jewish neighbors turned their backs on them. Once the war was over, the Russians took control of them. Property, businesses, and everything else was not returned. My grandfather traveled on foot with an organized group to get out of the lane. Many Jews had followed suit with them. They traveled to wars and were caught a few times. One of the first Jews being exported to Hungary, where he was eventually freed by the Russian soldiers when he was placed in Spanish as a slave. It was very touching. He eventually made his way to the field and left it there and remained a proud Zionist until the battle. He came to Canada because he met my grandmother and they started to live together when he came to Canada. She'd recently been there to visit, and when they met, that's how they met.
I would now like to introduce Professor Bareket Falk and Paul Kent, children of Holocaust survivors, to share their stories. Thank you. Today marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation. This is a place with 6 million, not with, but what is it? 6 million. 6 million is huge. So just think there would be 6 million would be the whole of the GDP. 6 million would be 80% of all of it. That's not 6 million. That's a lot. I think it's very different. And as many of you know, since October 7th, it has been an unbelievable upliftment of really hard, especially in Canada, which I have to say is painful for me to say. There's also been more and more Holocaust denial, which is also painful for me to say, which really makes this event, this day, so much more important. So I think it's important for us to hold this event, to commemorate the victims and their faith, to highlight the survivors and their resilience, really. But also for us, I think this is really important because we need to carry on their torch. We need to stand against anti-Semitism. We need to actively support the Jewish community around us, and we need to make sure that
going to go on, and I'm going to ask Paul to come up and tell us his story and his connection to the Holocaust. And after that, if I have the time to do that as well. But before I do that, I do hope that by the end of today's event, each one of you, or actually each one of us, leaves this space with knowing that we've learned one more thing about a Holocaust survivor or a Holocaust victim, but also that we leave this place with a sense of resilience and support. So, Paul.
Morning, God. What a privilege to be up here and speak. And the opportunity to speak to you gives a living voice to passing of my family, the majority of which suffered death through the Holocaust. At the age of 19, I was brought up in the Christian world of the United Church. I had no idea I had any Jewish lineage. And I'm in Toronto, George Brown College, working at a poultry abattoir. I had the distinct honor of putting the chickens on a shackle before the rabbi killed it and blessed it. This rabbi was Rabbi Pearl, and he was a gruff man. Wasn't nice to talk to, and terrible to his sons. They had a chain, and they still have a chain of Jewish delis in Toronto. But he was nice to me. And I said, Rabbi, I have an observation. He says, good for you, aren't you smart? He says, what's your observation? I said, Rabbi, I'm not judging you. You're not nice to anybody. You're terrible to your sons. I said, but you're nice to me, and that seems very peculiar. Why would you be so nice to me? Why wouldn't I be nice to you? Your grandfather was my best friend. So we went to synagogue together. I said, my grandfather? Are you talking my mother's people? Yes. I said, you would have had to have been in Romania. He goes, where do you think I'm from? I said, okay. He says, you're a Jew. I said, last time I checked, I was United Church. He said, if your mother's Jewish and your father's not, you're a Jew. You don't know any of this? I said, no. Go home, talk to your mother. I go home. I said, Mom, it's 1971. What are you afraid of? Like, why didn't you tell me I have Jewish lineage? Why are you hiding this? She said, don't judge me. I survived the last 20 weeks of Auschwitz. I was in Bucharest when they picked me up. And she said, you have no idea. My family, all of us, are gone. And she said, we came to Canada, your father and I. And my father, not being a Jew, suffered an equal, even a more suffering, because he had the smarts to jump out of the Hungarian army when he was at the Russian front. And they put him in a prisoner of war camp for 3 years, called Sloboditz, where 5,000 people died every year. So she said, we started a new life in Canada. And she said, I brought you up with God, I brought you up with ethics. She said, but to be a Jew, the world will never be that modern to accept the Jew. And she said, if you decide ever to be a Jew, know that there's a target on your back. She goes, I want it more for you. Turn the clock ahead. I'm married. I'm a church elder in the St. David's United Church. I'm running a Sunday school of 150 kids in the youth group. And I had a hunger for religious knowledge. And I was reading everything I could get my hands on. My daughter at McGill says, Dad, calls me. I've been spending some weekends with these Jewish musicians and started studying the Torah. And she said, I had a calling. I said, what's your calling? She said, the Holocaust destroyed our family. It interrupted our Jewish faith. She said, I'm taking the family back. I said, what are you doing? I'm converting. And she said, I'm going to Israel. And I said, Rebecca, can you imagine that? I've got a daughter named Tricia and a son named Ryan, and for no reason we named this one Rebecca DeBoer. So she said, Dad, I'm going to take the family back, And she said, that's my call. They're not going to interrupt our family. Comes a time where I need her in my business, and I said, come home for 6 months, I need you. She comes home. She said, Dad, you've read everything. She said, why don't you study the Torah with me a little bit? And will you do Shabbos with me? I said, sure. I started studying the Torah, and it was like going home. It felt so good. So can you imagine, at the age of about 57, I go back to my Jewish faith. I leave the United Church, and I go back to my Jewish faith. And as she goes back to Israel, she says, Dad, I'm going to introduce somebody that's going to help you. In comes a young Rabbi Zalman Zeltzman, full of fire, and he says to me, you need to give me this much money. I said, for what? He goes, for tefillin. I said, what's tefillin? He said, you'll see. And from that day forward, I do tefillin every week. I'm not the most observant Jew, but my connection to God has never been stronger. And to show that the Holocaust did not interrupt the Berkowitz family, which was my mother's name. My daughter went back to Israel, married. I have 5 beautiful grandchildren, ranging from twins at 4 to the age of 13. And the thing I'm most grateful for is my introduction back into the Jewish faith. And without the support system I had here, that wouldn't have happened. Without my daughter, that wouldn't happen. So as much as the Holocaust wanted to put an end not only to the Jewish nation, but the Jewish way of life, in our particular case, it didn't succeed. I'd like to thank you for the privilege of sharing this story, and it gives a voice and a spirit to my mother, who sadly suffered from post-traumatic stress, bouts of depression, and died at the young age of 58 when I was 30. She was my best friend. She would be so pleased to look down on and see her grandchildren Israel. And the fact that I'm part of this Jewish community and that I consider it a great privilege. Thank you for hearing my story.
I keep to appreciate that, first of all, there are other children of Holocaust survivors. That it is very difficult to share this story. So not everyone can do it, and it's difficult for me. But thank you, Paul, for sharing. And before I forget, my goodness, thank you to Rachel. Who is our AFL. Thank you very much. This was the last minute thing. Okay, so I will say this event is being held in many places around the world today, not just in Holocaust. And one of the places that is at Auschwitz. 5 years ago was the 75th anniversary. There were war wounded there, dignitary, but importantly, there were 100 survivors of the camp. This year, 5 years later, there are 50 survivors. You just highlight and emphasize why we need to do this. Okay, so I will tell you a little bit about my connection to the Holocaust. And I will also say that, or point out that there are banners here which you are welcome to come and take a look at afterwards, maybe be impressed by some of the stories. So, my father is a Holocaust survivor. His parents, my grandparents, were Holocaust victims. First, allow me to tell you about my father. My father's name is Chaim Falk, and I'm incredibly proud of him. He was born in 1929 in Berlin, and he is alive today, living in Israel at the age of 95. And we try to speak everything. He was the only child of Charlotte and Hans Falk, my grandparents. My grandfather was a prominent lawyer in Berlin, and he was one of the first ones whose license was revoked by the Nazi regime. He was also a cantor at the local synagogue, and I smile because I find this very striking, because we always kid my father that he cannot hold a note. And neither can I, by the way. So whatever it was, I don't know. In 1939, it was a little bit after Crystal Night. My grandparents packed up my father, who was 9 years old at the time, with 2 suitcases. They brought him to the train station, bound for Italy, and from there by ship to Israel. He was 9 years old, and he was alone. They told him that they would join him as soon as they get their exit visas, which they never did. My grandparents were deported to the Lodge Ghetto, which I recently found out that it's supposed to be pronounced Lodge Ghetto, in 1941, where they perished. Some would say where they were murdered. My grandmother died in 1944. She actually froze to death. My grandfather died in 1944 at the age of 55. And both of them are buried in the Lodge Cemetery in unmarked graves. I actually had a chance to visit that cemetery. It's very impressive. It has a very impressive gravestone from the 1800s, and it's very pretty. But right beside where all the gravestones are, there is a very large field, which when I was there was it was all knee-high grass, and all of that is unmarked graves. The Lodge Ghetto was formed in 1940, and the living conditions here were horrendous. In most of it, there were no running water, there was no sewage, and it was incredibly crowded, overcrowded. So about 20% of the people who were there actually died just because of these conditions. My grandmother was one of them. There were over 200,000 people that went through the Lodge Ghetto, and between 1,000 and 1,500 survived. It was the last remaining ghetto in Goodman. So those are my grandparents, and I really don't know that much more than that about my grandparents. I should say that my father never really talked about the Holocaust. So most of what I know is as a result of some research that mainly my brother did about my grandparents, as well as from my father's childhood friend from Berlin, who told me a lot. And also from my father, who wrote an autobiography quite a few years ago, where I learned a lot of things. So that's where my knowledge comes from. Okay, so my father, at the age of 9, arrived in Tel Aviv, actually in the port of Jaffa, with 2 suitcases and no money. And over the next 8 years, he lived with several foster families. He ended up in a yeshiva and then in a religious kibbutz. And when he was 17 years old, he was part of the Haganah. Haganah is the predecessor of the current IDF. And he was injured. He was injured in Arabic by Egyptian air raid. He was 17 when he was injured. spent the next 2 years in hospital for 2 reasons. One, because they tried to save his leg, and the other is because he really didn't have anywhere else to go. So that was 2 years, after which he did amputate his leg. So all I know of my father is one leg. And one of my neighbors, I should tell you, when being a child, she told me many years later that when I was a child, there was a time that I would limp, just because this is how I saw my father walk. But anyway, fast forward. My father was in Israel. He met my mother, Rachel, and he met the family, and he decided to get an education. So he received his bachelor's and his master's and his PhD from the University in accounting. So it's sort of befitting that here we are in the Goodman School of Business. He was 41 years old when he got his PhD, and I was 11. I was the oldest. And very shortly after that, we all went to Indiana, to the U.S., where he was a visiting professor. And I'm going to say that was the beginning of his academic career, which was very reputable, very prolific, actually. Over 40 years, he was a member of 5 universities over 3 continents. So they also like to travel a lot. But I will also tell you that in the Canadian connection, he was at McGill, and then University of Calgary, and then at McMaster. And he had to retire at 65 because at the time, there was mandatory retirement. But he did not retire until he was 80 years old, and even then, I think he would disagree with my statement. So, he spent much of his academic career in Canada. I will say that the CAAA, Canadian Academic Accounting Association, I hope I got it right, there is such a thing. In 1989, they actually established the Falk Award, which is given once a year to someone who advances accounting thought. To me, I always said to my father, how can accounting have, I thought accounting is just, but there is accounting thought and there is accounting theory, and I guess he was a big proponent of that. I will also say that last year, the CAAA inducted him into the Hall of Fame, and that was a very emotional ceremony. So like I said, my father didn't speak much about the Holocaust or about his youth in Germany. But I will just end and say one thing that he did, I think, instill in us. And I think this is in reference to the Holocaust. He said, money and material possessions can come and go, but education is something that no one can take away from you. So I would encourage us to pursue further education and, I would say, contribute to society. And so this is something that I really appreciate. And we do our best to instill this in our children. That's my story. And before we move to the next part of the program, I think we can put this together. I'm going to just ask. I know that I think that there might be some stuff before they want to say something, so just or share something, so this might be a bit of. But don't feel abrupt. All right, so we're going to move on. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to introduce Perla to you. Perla is a PhD student here at Falk, and I think most people sitting here with him as. And she has offered to provide us with some solid which I think is incredibly timely in a time when we know that not only knowledge of the Holocaust is dwindling, but even awareness of the Holocaust is dwindling. And I'll just share with you one finding of a recent survey that was published, I think, in many leading news outlets, where 46% of young adults, almost half of young adults in France, either never heard of the Holocaust or weren't sure that they'd heard of the Holocaust. And that's, to me, my goodness, that's an alarm. I will say that other countries were also told and the percentages were lower, but Canada was not, and I don't dare to think what it would be like. So with this, I pass it.
Well, thank you, Brooke, Jack, Bareket, and Paul for sharing your story, for contributing to the passing of Holocaust memory. Before we light memorial candles to honor the memory of the 6 million Jews and countless others who perished during the Holocaust, it is important to take a moment to reflect and critically examine how we talk about the Holocaust and how the Shoah is taught. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about this. Particularism versus universalization. The Holocaust, the Shoah, as commonly called in Europe and Israel, stands apart in its singular and systematic focus on the complete elimination of Jews. A particularist approach centers the Jewish experience in the Holocaust narratives. A universalized approach to Holocaust dilutes the Jewish experience. Recognizing this particularism does not diminish the suffering of others. Many of our allies in the resistance, as well as other groups who were targeted victims of Nazi crimes. Understanding the particularism of the Shoah ensures that the lessons of the Holocaust remain historically precise and morally powerful. Its particularism of the Shoah acknowledges that Jews were the primary target of Nazism and that the Holocaust was driven by anti-Semitism. For descendants of Shoah survivors like me, this tragedy is deeply personal. On the screen, you have my great-grandparents, Isaac and Dela Matisov, and their 3 children who were murdered by the Nazis sometime between July 1941 and October 1941 in Vitebsk. The intergenerational effects of the Holocaust are both psychological and biological. It is written in our genetic memory, shaping how we see the world and how we navigate it. Researchers, such as Rachel Yehuda, the leading experts on trauma, have documented how the experiences of Holocaust survivors alter gene expression in their descendants, with, for example, so heightened cortisol levels. These findings show that the trauma of the Holocaust is not just a metaphorical time. It is a physical and psychological reality. But the Holocaust is not just the story of survivors and their descendants. It is a collective tragedy for all Jews. Whether our grandparents endured the camps of Europe, hid in the forests, fled as refugees, or anxiously followed the news from North Africa, the United States, or Canada, the Holocaust was an existential threat to our people everywhere. It unified the Jewish experience in pain and in fear, as well as in resilience and solidarity. In 1943, while most Western civilization and governments did nothing and closed their doors to Jewish immigrants, American Jews gathered for the March on Washington, demanding action to save European Jewry. All Jews share an emotional and spiritual connection to the Shoah. It is our collective story, one that lives in our prayers, our memorials, and our determination to ensure that never again is not just a promise, but a commitment. Yet, as we move further away from the Holocaust in time, we face new threats to its memory. The Shoah's particularism must be preserved, not just for survivors and their descendants, but for the Jewish people as a whole. First, the Shoah was marked by its engineered and systematic design, a deliberate industrialized plan to exterminate an entire people. It was not a crime of ignorance or uncoordinated prejudice, but a sophisticated state policy implemented with chilling precision and efficiency. Second, the Shoah's targets were not chosen based on visible markers of otherness alone, but on their Jewishness, which transcended assimilation or societal status. German Jews who had fully integrated in every level of society, those who were culturally German, economically successful, and socially influential, were still marked by annihilation. Their assimilation, their success, and contributions to German society offered no protection. Instead, it magnified the Nazis' anti-Semitic obsession. As historian Yehuda Barer reminds us, the Shoah must be understood as an unprecedented attack on Jewish identity, existence, and continuity. To universalize it, or to reduce it to a general metaphor of hatred, is to erase its distinctiveness, it's to trivialize it, to dishonor its victims, and to diminish the lessons it can teach us. We most confront the ways in which Holocaust memory has been distorted and exploited. A common misframing depicts Nazi ideology as simply a form of white supremacy, targeting all non-whites. This narrative erases the Nazis' central focus, the complete annihilation of Jews. White supremacy and fascism were elements of Nazi ideology, where their ultimate goal was Jewish genocide, transcending race, nationality, or social standing. World domination to the Third Reich was a means to an end, the eradication of the Jewish people, of Jewish life everywhere. The misframing of Nazism also fails to address how Nazi propaganda, including Mein Kampf, continues to spread globally, particularly among radical Arab leaderships, where it fueled genocidal hatred of Jews. While we all know that anti-Semitic Nazism is still alive and well in far-right circles, alarmingly, Nazi-inspired anti-Semitism has also influenced discourse in Western universities, especially among segments of the left and anti-fascist groups. This was this morning. For those who follow the Ireland president, who has very fond feelings of Jews and Israel, they weaponized the Holocaust at the International Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony to attack Jews. The consequences of universalization the universalization of the Holocaust, failing to center anti-Semitism in its memory, and the misframing of Nazism have created fertile ground for Holocaust denial, distortion, revisionism, and inversion. These forms of erasure, whether minimizing the Holocaust scope, manipulating its history, or accusing Jews of behaving like Nazis, are not only distortions of the past, but active threats to the present. They perpetuate modern anti-Semitism and erode the Shoah's integrity. These forms of Holocaust erasure thrive in climates where the Holocaust particularism is diluted. Universalization has made it easier for bad actors to misuse its memory for political agendas, turning it into a tool for virtue signaling while ignoring the ongoing threats of living Jewish communities. Dara Horn writes in People Love Dead Jews, "It is easy to commemorate dead Jews. It is much harder to stand up for living ones." Historian Yehuda Bauer reminds us, Holocaust memory must not be left in the hands of others. It belongs to the Jewish people, and its preservation must center on Jewish voices. Nothing about us without us. Professor Dan Michman argues that teaching the Holocaust in a universal way contributes to contemporary anti-Semitism. Sometimes something is not better than nothing. When Holocaust education erases its central focus on anti-Semitism, it risks misinforming future generations and perpetuating the very hatred it seeks to combat. A survey by the ADL came out a couple of weeks ago and should alarm all of us. Out of 58,000 adults from 103 countries surveyed, 46% held anti-Semitic beliefs. Extrapolated, that is 2.2 billion adults dislike Jews. Most of them also denied historical facts about the Holocaust. To my fellow Jews, 80 years later, it is time for us Jews to reclaim our history and ensure its accuracy and ethical handling. These collective memories are ours to safeguard, not for the sake of the past alone, but for the present and future. We must take responsibility for reclaiming the memory of the Holocaust. Many of us, with the best intentions, contributed to its universalization. Some hoped that framing the Shoah as a general lesson about hatred and prejudice, its message would resonate more widely and foster greater empathy. Others wanted to move past the pain, to forget their horrors and live in a world where anti-Semitism no longer existed, hoping that if we don't talk about it, it does not exist. Many genuinely cared about broader social justice causes and did not want to seem narrowly focused on Jewish suffering. These motivations, though well-intentioned, fired back. Ultimately, they allowed the Holocaust's unique lessons to be diluted and its memory to be exploited. 80 years later, I turn to my fellow academics and leaders. The Holocaust was not a moral failure. It was a failure of education, science, and intellectual integrity. Auschwitz was built with the tools of advanced engineering, medicine, and biology, all twisted to serve a genocidal agenda. Academia's silence or complicity allowed pseudoscience like eugenics to flourish unchecked. The lessons of the Shoah demand more of us as scholars. Whatever our field, our work shapes the future. Universities are epicenters for knowledge formation and dissemination. It's also the center for critical appraisal for problematic status quo. Holocaust lessons should be taught and researched accurately, with its particularism and anti-Semitism at the center, centering Jewish voices. No one else can tell this story with the urgency and authenticity it demands. For those looking to deepen their understanding of this history, I encourage you to visit the new exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum, not far away, not long ago. This powerful exhibit brings the reality of Auschwitz closer to us here in Canada and provides an invaluable opportunity to reflect on the Shoah and its legacy. This is not the end of the conversation. It's only the beginning. Let the discussions continue. We need speaker series, scholarly dialogues, and spaces where these truths can be unpacked and explored with nuance and rigor. In that spirit, I am honored to announce the upcoming Symposium on Anti-Semitism, Advancing Knowledge, Informing Responses, to be held May 5th to 6th here at Brock University. This event will bring together leading scholars in the field to deepen our understanding of anti-Semitism and equip us to respond more effectively. To conclude, let us remember that the Holocaust is not, like we saw in the way Bareket really shared it. that the Holocaust is not only a story of tragedy, but also one of immense resilience. Survivors have shown us the remarkable strength to rebuild after unimaginable loss. Dr. Peter Sutfeld, a Holocaust survivor and psychology professor, whose prodigy is here as the vice provost. So Dr. Peter Sutfeld has studied survivor populations extensively, highlighting their ability to thrive in entirely new countries and contribute profoundly to their communities. This resilience did not erase the pain, but transformed it into growth, both personal and collective. The strength is our inheritance. It reminds us that rebuilding is possible, even in the face of destruction. And it challenges us to honor the legacy. Their resilience should inspire not only our remembrance, but also our resolve to act, ensuring the lessons of the Holocaust are preserved and its memory fuels a commitment to justice, the future of Holocaust memory, and the fight against anti-Semitism. And particularism and universalization of the Holocaust can be hand in hand. Once we center the Jewish voices, there are many lessons on hatred and prejudice that we can share and apply everywhere else. Let us be bold, let us be rigorous, and let us ensure that the Shoah's lessons are not only remembered, but acted upon. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we're about to do our final part of the event today, which is the candle lighting on my left, and we will have some people great. Okay, so we will have the candle lighting, after which we will have phone lit for us, thank you, and reading words, and take the time, look at the banners, discuss, exchange thoughts, feelings. So I'm going to cut you short just because I'm cognizant of the time constraint and I know that people here have to go. But I do encourage you, I understand what you're saying, and this is certainly worthy of discussion, and I encourage you to bring this up in the time that we have after the candle lighting.
I would be delighted to talk about it after the candle lighting. So we are honored to have here some of our elected officials, dignitaries. We're extremely grateful for you taking the time today to pay tribute to the Holocaust victims, survivors, and be with us. So then I'm going to invite, in the order, we have a member of parliament representing the federal government, MP Vance Badawi. Please come. Light a candle.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. That's really today. Marking 80 years since liberation of Auschwitz. For him, calls for a deeper reflection on the legacy of those lost and counting responsibility and such words. Today, after marking 80 years, we stand in remembrance of the 6 million Jews living in the Eight decades passed. 8 decades passed. Since the end of World War II. Yet the pain and the loss made as real as the honor of life and the tragedy of family, communities, and the cultures. We remember the stories of those who survived, whose resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering continued to teach us the value of hope, the value of strength, as well as defiance. Today serves not only as a reminder of the past, but also a call to action. A call to action in the present and well in the future. With each passing year, fewer survivors are with us to share their personal experience. And we have others. It becomes our responsibility, each and every one of us. Ours as individuals, as communities, as nations, to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust we must remember the dangers of unjust. The horrors of indifference, the consequences of allowing prejudice to thrive. As we gather today, let us reflect on the lessons of the Holocaust with a new sense of urgency. The world has changed. The world has changed in many ways in the last 8 years. But the threat of hate, the threat of intolerance and dehumanization remains. It's on each and every one of us to stand. It is on each and every one of us to safeguard the dignity and the rights of all people. It is up to each and every one of us to ensure that history never repeats. May we honor the memory of those who were lost in committing to a future of justice, a future of peace, a future of equality, a future. Such cool. I don't remember.
Beth Dina Fell on behalf of Tony. And
My name is Beth Dina, and I'm here on behalf of the Falk family. And they're involved in the lake. Tony had previous student commitments in Ottawa that he had put into before in the house around so the sentence back today. But it was important for us to attend, and I've learned a lot. I really appreciate that. A good friend sent me a message this morning. Many of you may know it, but it was about Leonard Cohen's song, Dance to the End of Love, that's often been used to express love. But she actually was explaining to me that the truth is its inspiration comes from a very dark source. Cohen encountered a haunting image in his childhood, a photograph of musicians being forced to play in one of the death camps. The juxtaposition of beauty and horror deeply affected him, leading him to create a song that intertwined themes of love, death, and resilience. I just wanted to read just a few of the lyrics. Dance me to your beauty with a burning violin. Dance me through the panic till I'm gathered safely in. Lift me like an olive branch and be my homeward dove. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. I thought the lyrics seemed so symbolic on this day, in agreement with my friend, combining the tragedy and the ability to free one's mind from the physical pain. It demonstrates how through music, education, photos, and communicating, we can continue to ensure the next generation is aware of the horrible losses and the pain suffered. Thank you for including us today. Never again.
Mark Stevens on behalf of the St. Catharines City Council.
Thank you, everyone. I would just like to point out, too, that I talked to our local MPPs the other night when Gates did. We have the Mayor Cisco and the City of St. Catharines Council. I want to thank you for being here today and to come together to this. I'd like to start by acknowledging some of our guests that we already know. That's on behalf of Tony, Holden Ellie's office, and sorry, MP Dan Sadaway, and of course, Councilor Professor Krishna, and the crowd as well. So today is an opportunity to reflect on the past and the lessons it continues to teach us. It's a chance to honor courage and resilience of those who lived through an unimaginable time, as well as the strength of those who carried the sword. I'd also like to thank Brock University for hosting this, for creating a space where we can all gather to reflect, learn, and connect to the community. Events like this remind us of the power of unity and understanding. So as we move forward to the program and listening to the previous speakers, let's take time to listen, reflect, and look ahead. By remembering the past, reaffirm our commitment to building kinder, more
here. That. Mayor Falk.
Here today. I'm very proud to be here today with my granddaughter, Charlotte. Very honored that I was invited to this event. Just want to support, stand with this community as you remember this past of the human foods. I can't sufficiently describe. Again, just happy to be here. Be with my friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then I would like to invite Brad Clark, Brock University's Associate Vice President, Students, and Acting Associate Vice President of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
On behalf of Brock University, I want to express my gratitude to your University of today's event. I'd like to acknowledge each of the speakers, share the history today. Also, let me acknowledge the Brock communities came together to join us.
I would like to invite our host. We are honored to be today in the Goodman Atrium of the Goodman Business School. And we would not be here if not for Barry Wright, who cared about being here. So thank you, Barry. Please come light a candle. And I want to acknowledge we have right on our side Ned Goodman. And you'll say that.
One of our accounting professors. I think he's coming to say hi to your father. As I see your sign up there, the message, we will never forget. And we'll not forget. As you mentioned, one of the things that we wanted to be here with you, to be able to have Ned join the celebration of remembrance. And Ned is very important to the Goodman School of Business. Ned is an amazing man. I was fortunate to be there. Ed passed away. I went to his funeral, and it was the first Jewish funeral that I had been to, and found it was powerful to be part of the community that actually is there to physically help their beloved benefactor, Ed. And when I think about how powerful that was for one individual, one member of the Jewish community, I can't imagine what it's like to think about sharing 6 million with your friends and family and colleagues. How powerful not to be able to be there, to be at that moment, to celebrate their lives. Right? And so as we're here to remember, I think it is really important. I think everybody in this room shares this, that we will have to remember.
Thank you. I would like to mention that Ned Goodman was a very strong supporter of the Jewish community, of Holocaust memory, Holocaust remembrance, and of the State of Israel. And his children continue his work right now, and they're very, very proud of us being here today. If there's a member of the Niagara Regional Police who would like to come and light a candle, we are very grateful for the protection and partnership of the Niagara Regional Police with the Niagara Jewish community. It has not been an easy past 3 months, year and a half, and they have been there by our side.
I'm Jeff Woodson with the community. On behalf of our chief, just thank you very much for being here as well. As a police service, it's found loss upon us. It was the authorities of the day that didn't achieve. It's our duty to remember that.
On behalf of the Jewish faculty at Brock University, I'd like to invite another child of Holocaust survivor to light a candle. And then we will conclude with the Kalmale.
Thank you all for being here. The story of my grandparents, whom I never met, is here, and if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to add details. But I want to bring the word never was used a lot today. I think sometimes it's more powerful when it comes from an eloquent, poetic word. So I'm going to just use a short poem by probably the most eloquent poem survivors. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night 7 times through. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even where I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
I would like to call up all the Brock students to come light the candle, and Zana will be reciting the candle.
Rise for the pale mother.
חכמים שייכים במרעים. הנמצאים ממקום קרוב כנפי השכינה, ואולי לא יזכדי שנותיהם, כדי הרקי המזמינים. וסמיש מסם של כל אלה שנספו בשואה שהלכו ברידה. בעבור שנתו הצדקת בדס קרס נשמסם, בגן עדן, והם מנוחסם. ולכן בברכנו יסתגרים, סייסר כנפה וילמים, ויצר ביצרי לחיים נס נשמסם, אחיי נחלסם. ורח המשכבם בשערים, ונאמר אמן.
With this, the program is concluded. I'm sorry we didn't do the English version. We didn't print it. Okay. Yeah. So feel free if you need to leave. You need to can walk around and look at the living archives. And I do want whoever wants to talk and have a discussion about Rafi's question. I think it's a very, very important question that he asked. And this is not, well, okay, a statement. For me, it's a question. It's still a question. And I question that question, that statement, which is what universities are for. We are trying to advance knowledge, to figure out what is the right thing to do. We have a problem. We have Jewish hatred. We have the fading of Holocaust memory. And what is the right way to go about it? I don't know that I have the answer. I presented a scholarly view of critical examination, which is what scholars do. And I'm happy to have a conversation so we can all figure out the truth together, because this is what universities are here for. So if I can make one comment, feel free to get, I don't know, I feel like I don't want to take the floor, but I can. I'm here if you want to. I'm not ending the discussion. I'm here. We can have a conversation.